Kitschban Video 6. The first insult came before the fuel nozzle even clicked into place. Move it, trash. The words sliced across the busy gas station, loud enough to silence nearby conversations. Several customers turned their heads. A teenage cashier looked up from the register. Even the humming fuel pumps seemed to fade beneath the weight of that single sentence. The old man didn't answer. He simply stood beside his faded pickup truck, one weathered hand resting on the pump handle while gasoline flowed steadily into the tank. His denim jacket had been washed so many times its color had surrendered years ago. The knees of his work pants carried permanent stains from countless repair jobs. Everything about him whispered an ordinary life. The black luxury SUV rolled to a stop beside him. Its polished paint reflected the afternoon sun like liquid glass. Behind the wheel sat a man no older than 45, dressed in an expensive tailored suit despite the summer heat. A gold watch gleamed beneath his cuff as he stepped out, irritation already written across his face. "I don't have all day," he snapped. "People who drive junk like that should use the pumps in the back." A few uneasy chuckles escaped from two young men filling their own car nearby. The old man slowly removed the nozzle from his truck. He looked at the stranger only once. There was no anger in his eyes, no embarrassment, only the quiet patience of someone who had survived harder days than this. "I'm almost finished," he said softly. The businessman scoffed. "Of course you are. Men like you always think everyone else should wait." His voice grew louder. "You know what your problem is? You people never amount to anything, yet you still get in the way of those who actually work." The words hung heavily over the concrete. No one stepped in. A mother standing beside Pump 6 instinctively pulled her son a little closer. The cashier lowered his eyes. Everyone had witnessed scenes like this before. Most people simply pretended not to. The old man returned the nozzle to its holder with careful hands. He reached into his pocket, counted a few folded bills, and paid inside without saying another word. When he came back out carrying a small paper bag, the businessman was still glaring at him. Finally, the man muttered, "Trash should know its place." The old man paused for the briefest moment. His fingers tightened around the paper bag. Inside was a small stuffed rabbit wrapped in pink tissue paper. He had spent nearly 20 minutes choosing it. A birthday gift. For someone he wasn't even sure would remember him. Then everything changed. The rear passenger door of the luxury SUV flew open. A little girl with dark curls climbed out before anyone could stop her. "Daisy," a woman's voice shouted from inside the vehicle. But the child wasn't listening. Her bright eyes locked onto the old man standing beside the worn pickup. For a heartbeat, the entire station seemed to freeze. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile children offer strangers. The unmistakable smile of recognition. "Grandpa," she ran. Tiny sneakers slapped against the concrete as she crossed the lanes between the fuel pumps without hesitation. The businessman spun around. "Daisy, stop." Too late. The little girl threw both arms around the old man's waist as though she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. He staggered slightly from the force of the hug. The paper bag slipped from his hand. The stuffed rabbit rolled gently across the pavement. Tears welled instantly in the old man's eyes. Slowly, almost as if afraid the moment might disappear, he wrapped his trembling arms around the child. The entire gas station fell silent. Silence settled over the gas station long after the little girl threw her arms around the old man. The businessman stood frozen beside his luxury SUV, one hand still gripping the fuel nozzle. His confident expression had vanished, replaced by complete disbelief. The old man knelt slowly, his aging knees protesting against the hard concrete. He held the little girl, as if he were afraid she might disappear the moment he let go. "You've grown so much," he whispered. His voice trembled. "I almost didn't recognize you." The little girl leaned back, just enough to look at his face. "I knew it was you," she said proudly, wiping away a tear with her tiny hand. "Mom showed me your picture every night." The old man smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone who had just won an argument. It was the smile of a man who had spent years believing he had already lost everything worth fighting for. Behind them, customers exchanged confused glances. None of it made sense. Only moments ago, the old man had looked like someone life had quietly passed by. Now a child was holding him with the fierce certainty that only unconditional love could create. The businessman finally found his voice. "Daisy." His words came out weaker than he intended. "Come back here." She didn't move. Instead, She tightened her embrace around the old man's neck. "I missed you, Grandpa." The sentence landed with more force than any accusation. A heavy silence followed. The old man gently stroked her hair, his rough hands moving with remarkable tenderness. Those hands had spent decades repairing broken engines, replacing rusted pipes, fixing leaking roofs, and carrying lumber heavier than most men half his age could lift. Now they trembled simply because a little girl had called him Grandpa. Few people would have guessed what those hands had built, or what they had sacrificed. His name was Samuel Carter, 68 years old, a widower for nearly 2 decades. Every morning before sunrise, he unlocked the maintenance shed at Westbrook Community College. He wasn't a professor. He wasn't an administrator. He wasn't anyone students remembered after graduation. He repaired broken doors, changed burned-out light bulbs, painted classrooms during summer breaks, fixed heating systems before winter storms arrived. Most people on campus simply called him Mr. Sam. He preferred it that way. When students thanked him, he usually answered with the same quiet smile. "Just doing my job." After work, while traffic crawled toward expensive neighborhoods, Samuel drove his faded pickup to a small white house on the edge of town. The roof had been patched more times than he could count. The front porch leaned slightly to one side. The flower beds weren't perfect, but every Saturday morning, he still planted fresh flowers beside the walkway. Pink ones, because his daughter had loved pink flowers. When she was little, inside the house, time seemed reluctant to move forward. A faded family photograph still rested on the fireplace. A child's height marks remained penciled onto the kitchen doorway. Tiny dates, tiny memories, each one carefully preserved. His neighbors often wondered why an old man living alone kept a second bedroom perfectly clean. The answer waited quietly inside. A small bookshelf filled with children's stories. A stuffed bear sitting neatly on a pillow. Colorful blankets folded with impossible precision. Every birthday, every Christmas, Samuel bought one new toy. Sometimes it was a teddy bear, sometimes a puzzle, sometimes a storybook with bright illustrations. He placed each gift carefully inside the room, still wrapped, still waiting. Not because anyone was coming, because hope was easier to keep alive when it had something to hold on to. No one at work knew any of this. To them, Samuel was simply the quiet maintenance man who never complained, who always volunteered for overtime, who brought homemade cookies on holidays, who somehow remembered every employee's birthday but never mentioned his own. There was one habit everyone noticed. Every Friday afternoon, just before driving home, Samuel stopped at the same gas station. He always parked beside Pump 4. He always bought a cup of black coffee. And before leaving, he wandered through the small convenience store looking for a children's toy. Not expensive, just something that might make a little girl smile. The young cashier had asked him once, months earlier, "Grandkids coming to visit this weekend, Mr. Sam?" Samuel had paused for only a second. Then he smiled. "I hope so someday." Nothing more. He never explained. He never needed to. This Friday had begun exactly the same way, until a stranger looked at his worn clothes, his old truck, his weathered hands, and decided they were enough to measure the worth of a man. The businessman had seen faded denim. The little girl had seen home. And sometimes, children recognized love long before adults recognized the truth. No one moved. The little girl still clung to Samuel as though letting go would be the greatest mistake of her young life. The businessman's face tightened. Confusion lasted only a second. Pride arrived much faster. "Daisy," his voice became firmer. "Come here. Now." She buried her face deeper against Samuel's shoulder. "No." The single word echoed across the gas station. Several customers exchanged uneasy glances. Children rarely refused their fathers in public, especially not with that kind of certainty. The businessman forced a tight smile, clearly aware that strangers were watching. "I'm sorry, everyone," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Kids have vivid imaginations." He stepped closer and reached for his daughter. "Sweetheart, you've mistaken this gentleman for someone else." Samuel slowly stood, still holding the child with one protective arm. "I think she'd rather answer for herself." His voice remained calm, almost gentle. The businessman frowned. "You stay out of this." Samuel didn't respond. He had spent enough years learning that silence often carried more weight than anger. "Daisy," the man insisted again. "Look at me." The little girl finally lifted her head. Her cheeks were damp with tears. "This is Grandpa." She spoke with complete certainty. "You said Grandpa lived far away." The businessman laughed. It sounded forced. No, sweetheart. Your grandfather passed away years ago. Samuel's expression changed ever so slightly. Not because of the insult. Because of the lie. The little girl shook her head so hard that her curls bounced. No. She pointed at Samuel's face. Mom cries when she looks at his picture. The words struck like a hammer. A woman pumping gas nearby lowered the nozzle before her tank was full. The teenage cashier stepped outside the convenience store without realizing he had left the register unattended. Everyone could feel something unfolding. The businessman noticed it too. His polished confidence began to crack. Still, he refused to retreat. He looked Samuel up and down once more. The faded jacket. The worn boots. The old pickup with rust creeping along its wheel wells. Then he smirked. I understand what's happening. He folded his arms. You saw an opportunity. Samuel simply blinked. I beg your pardon. My daughter is friendly. The businessman shrugged dramatically. People like you take advantage of that. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Even those who had remained silent earlier shifted uncomfortably. The accusation felt uglier than the first insult. Samuel lowered his eyes to the little girl in his arms. Would you stand beside me for a moment, sweetheart? She nodded immediately. Her tiny hand never let go of his. The businessman scoffed. See, you've already manipulated her. Samuel looked at him for the first time since the confrontation had begun. His pale blue eyes held neither anger nor resentment. Only sadness. Young man. He paused. I don't know what kind of life taught you to measure people by their clothes. His gaze drifted briefly toward the luxury SUV. But I've learned that the most expensive things in this world are often the easiest to lose. The businessman laughed sharply. Spare me the philosophy. He gestured toward Samuel's pickup. You've spent your whole life accomplishing nothing, and now you're trying to lecture me? He spread both hands toward the gas station as though presenting evidence. Look at yourself. Look at me. I built everything I have. His voice rose with every sentence. People respect success. They respect winners. They don't respect failures. Samuel listened without interruption. There had been a time, many years ago, when words like these would have cut deeply. Not anymore. Age had taught him a difficult lesson. The opinions of strangers could only wound a man who had forgotten who he was. A gust of warm afternoon wind swept across the station. The small paper bag still lay where it had fallen. The pink tissue paper had unfolded. The stuffed rabbit rested quietly on the concrete. The little girl noticed it first. Her eyes brightened. Is that for me? Samuel hesitated. He smiled with quiet embarrassment. I wasn't sure I'd ever get the chance to give it to you. The businessman followed her gaze. His expression hardened once again. So that's your game. He kicked the paper bag lightly with the toe of his polished shoe. A cheap toy. You think one stuffed animal makes you a grandfather? The rabbit slid several feet across the pavement before stopping beside the curb. A collective gasp escaped the people watching. The little girl stared at the toy, then back at Samuel. Tears filled her eyes again. Why did you do that? She whispered. For the first time since arriving at the station. The businessman had no answer. And somewhere behind the tinted windows of the SUV, a woman had just opened the passenger door. She had heard her daughter's voice. She had heard the word, Grandpa. The color drained from her face. The woman stepped out of the SUV as though the ground beneath her had suddenly become unsteady. She didn't notice the curious stares. She didn't hear the murmurs spreading through the gas station. Her eyes were fixed on only one person, Samuel. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. 23 years. An entire lifetime compressed into a single heartbeat. Dad. The word escaped her lips almost as a whisper. Samuel looked at her. His gentle smile remained, though his eyes glistened with tears he had spent decades learning to hide. Hello, Emily. Her knees nearly gave way. It had been so many years since she'd heard him say her name. The little girl looked from one face to the other, smiling through her tears. I told Daddy it was Grandpa. Emily couldn't answer. She simply nodded. Across the concrete, the businessman stared at his wife in disbelief. You know him? Emily slowly turned toward her husband. There was hurt in her eyes. And disappointment. Know him? Her voice trembled. He's my father. Silence crashed over the station once again. The businessman opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His confident posture, so commanding only minutes earlier, began to crumble beneath the weight of a truth he had never expected. Samuel quietly bent down and picked up the stuffed rabbit that had been kicked across the pavement. He brushed the dust from its soft white fur with extraordinary care. The little girl watched every movement. "You bought it for me?" Samuel smiled. "I wasn't sure if pink was still your favorite color." She hugged the rabbit tightly. "It is." The word struck Emily like an arrow. Pink. Her favorite color. She remembered another stuffed rabbit. Almost 30 years earlier. She had been 6 years old. Their family hadn't had much money. Her father worked construction during the day, repaired neighbors' appliances at night, and delivered newspapers before sunrise. 3 jobs. Sometimes 4. Anything to keep food on the table after her mother became too sick to work. One rainy evening, Emily had stood in front of a toy store window. There, among dozens of expensive dolls, sat a small pink rabbit. She hadn't asked for it. She already knew the answer. Money was too tight. But children looked anyway. Samuel had noticed. He said nothing. That night, after putting Emily to bed, he quietly rode his old bicycle across town. He spent nearly all the cash left in his wallet on that little rabbit. For the next week, he skipped lunch every day. When Emily woke the following Saturday, the rabbit was sitting beside her pillow with a handwritten note. "For the bravest little girl in the world. Love, Dad." She had slept with it every night until the fabric began to fade. The memory rushed back so vividly that Emily covered her mouth to stop herself from sobbing. Samuel noticed the tears forming in her eyes. "You remembered." Emily nodded through broken breaths. "I still have it." Samuel's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "You kept it." "I couldn't throw it away." She smiled sadly. It was never just a toy. The afternoon sun seemed softer now. The noise of passing traffic faded into the distance. For Samuel, the years peeled away. He no longer saw the successful woman standing before him. He saw the little girl who used to run into his arms after school, proudly showing him drawings made with broken crayons. He remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle on a quiet street, running behind her until his legs burned, pretending not to notice when she finally balanced on her own. He remembered braiding her hair, poorly, but with determination, because her mother was too weak to stand. He remembered every school recital, every scraped knee, every birthday cake baked from boxed mix because homemade frosting cost too much. Then another memory surfaced. The hardest one. The hospital room. His wife's final days. Emily was only 15. Before taking her last breath, Mary's frail hand had reached for Samuel's. "Promise me." Her voice had barely been audible. "Don't let our little girl give up her dreams because of money." Samuel had made that promise. He never broke it. He sold the fishing boat he'd rebuilt with his father. He mortgaged the family home. He emptied every retirement account. He accepted every overtime shift he could find. When Emily earned admission to one of the country's best universities, she never knew where the tuition money truly came from. Whenever she asked, Samuel gave the same answer. "I've got it covered." She believed him, because fathers were supposed to have all the answers. What she never knew was that every semester her father quietly started over from nothing. Years later, misunderstandings, unanswered letters, and carefully hidden sacrifices slowly built a wall between them. Neither one intended it. But silence has a way of growing heavier than truth. Standing in the middle of that gas station, Emily suddenly realized something that stole the air from her lungs. Her father had never stopped buying gifts. He had never stopped waiting. He had never stopped loving her. She looked at the stuffed rabbit in Daisy's arms, then at the man whose worn clothes had fooled everyone except a little girl. Some people carried their wealth in luxury cars. Samuel Carter carried his in memories, promises, and a love that had survived 23 years of silence. No one seemed willing to break the silence. Emily stood beside her father, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. Daisy clutched the pink rabbit against her chest, as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. The businessman stared at the cracked pavement. For the first time in years, success offered him no words. Then another voice rose from behind the crowd. "Mr. Carter?" Everyone turned. The young cashier hurried out from the convenience store, still wearing his blue station apron. He couldn't have been older than 22. His name tag read Ethan. His hands trembled slightly. You really are Mr. Carter, aren't you?" Samuel looked up and offered the familiar smile Ethan had seen almost every Friday for the past 3 years. "I suppose I am." Ethan let out a nervous laugh. "I knew it." The businessman frowned. "You know this man?" Ethan looked genuinely confused by the question. "Know him?" He glanced back at Samuel. "I've known him longer than anyone here." The crowd shifted closer, not because they wanted gossip, because they sensed another piece of the story was about to surface. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. I've worked here since high school. Every Friday afternoon. He smiled at Samuel. He stops at Pump 4. Several customers exchanged surprised looks. Pump 4. Always the same one. He buys exactly 1 cup of black coffee. And then he spends 15 or 20 minutes walking around the toy aisle. Daisy hugged the rabbit tighter. Ethan continued. I used to think he was shopping for grandchildren who visited every weekend. He laughed softly. So one day I asked him. Samuel lowered his eyes. He already knew which conversation Ethan was remembering. The gas station seemed to disappear. For a brief moment, only memory remained. It had been late autumn. Rain tapped gently against the store windows. Business was slow. Samuel had been standing in front of a shelf filled with stuffed animals. He picked up a small teddy bear, turned it over, smiled, then quietly placed it into his shopping basket. Ethan, 16 at the time, grinned from behind the register. Your granddaughter must really love bears. Samuel looked at the toy for a long second. I hope she will. Ethan frowned. You mean, she hasn't seen it yet? Samuel shook his head. No, but someday. His smile carried more hope than certainty. Maybe she'll come looking for her old grandpa. He paid for the bear, folded the receipt carefully into his wallet, and walked out into the rain alone. The memory faded. Back in the present, Ethan swallowed hard. He said that every single time. The crowd listened without moving. Not always about bears. Sometimes puzzles. Sometimes coloring books. Sometimes dolls. But always the same ending. Ethan looked toward Daisy. Maybe she'll come looking for her old grandpa someday. Emily's shoulders began to shake. She covered her face. Oh, Dad. Her voice broke completely. You kept buying them. Samuel gave a small shrug. They weren't expensive. But hope shouldn't be either. No one answered. Even the breeze seemed reluctant to disturb the moment. Ethan wasn't finished. There was something else. Samuel glanced toward him with quiet surprise. You don't have to, I do. Ethan's voice was firmer now. People deserve to know. He turned toward the businessman. About 6 months ago, there was a little boy outside this station. He couldn't have been more than 8. His mom's credit card had been declined. They were trying to buy medicine. The kid was crying because he thought his little sister was going to stay sick. The businessman listened silently. Samuel looked embarrassed, as though he wished the story would end before it truly began. Ethan smiled. Mr. Carter walked over. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't make a speech. He simply paid. Then he left before the mother even realized who had helped her. Several people in the crowd exchanged glances. An older truck driver slowly nodded. I remember that. So do I. Another customer added. The woman chased after him. He just waved and drove away. Ethan continued. And that wasn't the only time. When someone's tire blew out, he stayed until it was changed. When Mrs. Henderson's battery died last winter, he jump-started her car. When one of the homeless veterans came through town, he bought him dinner. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. That's enough, Ethan. The young cashier shook his head. No, sir. Not today. You've spent years doing good things when nobody was watching. His voice softened. I think it's okay if people know now. The businessman slowly lifted his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Samuel's faded jacket, or his old pickup, or his worn work boots. He was looking at a man whose quiet life had left fingerprints on people who expected nothing in return. A maintenance worker, a widower, a father, a grandfather, a man who measured wealth by lives touched instead of dollars earned. The luxury SUV suddenly seemed strangely small, not because it had changed, because everyone finally understood that true stature could never be parked in a reserved space or purchased with a platinum card. Then Daisy tugged gently on Samuel's hand. Grandpa. She looked up with innocent curiosity. Can I see the other presents someday? Samuel blinked. The other presents? She nodded. The ones you've been saving for me. Emily's eyes widened. She looked slowly toward her father. You still have them? Samuel hesitated. Then, with a shy smile almost hidden beneath years of quiet endurance, he answered. I never had the heart to throw them away. Emily closed her eyes. A fresh wave of tears escaped, because in that single sentence, she finally understood exactly how long her father had been waiting for someone to come home. Emily could no longer hold herself together. For years, she had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. Sometimes she pictured herself angry, sometimes ashamed, sometimes convinced she would never see her father again. Never once had she imagined finding him beside an old pickup truck, holding the granddaughter he had never stopped loving. Dad, her voice cracked under the weight of 23 silent years. I'm so sorry. Samuel looked at her the same way he always had. Not with judgment, not with disappointment, only with quiet affection. You don't have to apologize the moment you see me. Emily shook her head. No, I do. She stepped closer, slowly, almost timidly, like a frightened little girl approaching the safest place she had ever known. I'm the one who stopped calling. I'm the one who believed things I should have asked you about. I'm the one who let years become decades. Each confession seemed to make breathing harder. I thought. She wiped away fresh tears. I thought you were happier without me. Samuel's gentle smile carried a sadness that only parents truly understand. There wasn't a single birthday I forgot. Emily closed her eyes. There wasn't a single one I forgot either. I just didn't know how to come back. A warm breeze drifted across the station, lifting a few strands of her hair. Samuel reached out. Instinctively, with slow, careful fingers, he tucked those loose strands behind her ear, exactly as he had done when she was a little girl before every first day of school. Emily froze. The gesture was so familiar, so ordinary, so deeply missed. She suddenly wasn't 38 years old anymore. She was 7, standing on a wooden stool while her father struggled to tie her ponytail straight. She laughed through her tears. You still do it the same way. Samuel chuckled softly. I was never very good at braiding hair. You were terrible. I know. But you never complained. Because you tried. For the first time that afternoon, they laughed together. It was quiet, small, fragile, yet somehow powerful enough to erase years of distance. Daisy watched them with wide, curious eyes. She tugged gently on Emily's sleeve. Mom. Emily looked down. Why are you crying if Grandpa is here? The innocence of the question pierced straight through every adult heart. Emily knelt beside her daughter. Because sometimes, she struggled to finish. Grown-ups make mistakes that take a very long time to fix. Daisy looked from her mother to Samuel. Then she smiled. So we can fix it now? No one answered immediately. Children often discovered the simplest truths adults spent years avoiding. Emily stood again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped both arms around her father. The embrace was awkward at first. Years apart had made strangers of their movements. Then Samuel slowly hugged her back. His weathered hands rested gently against her shoulders. His eyes closed. For one fleeting moment, the gas station disappeared. The years disappeared. The misunderstandings disappeared. He wasn't holding a successful businesswoman. He was holding the little girl who used to fall asleep on his shoulder after long drives home. I missed you, Emily whispered. So much. Samuel's voice was barely audible. I knew. You knew? You wouldn't still be hurting. If you had ever stopped loving me. Emily broke down completely. The customers who had gathered nearby quietly looked away, giving the family the privacy they deserved. Even the teenage cashier wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Across the parking lot, the businessman remained rooted beside the SUV. Every word he had spoken replayed mercilessly inside his mind. Trash. Failure. People like you. He had thrown those words at the very man whose sacrifices had built the life his wife now lived. The very father who had worked himself to exhaustion so Emily could attend college. The very grandfather his daughter had somehow recognized with a single glance. He suddenly understood why Daisy had run without hesitation. Children don't recognize expensive watches. They don't recognize luxury cars. They recognize love. The kind that waits. The kind that forgives. The kind that never keeps score. Samuel finally loosened the embrace and smiled at his daughter. So, he glanced toward Daisy, who was proudly holding the stuffed rabbit. I suppose I owe someone a lot of birthday presents. Daisy's eyes sparkled. How many? Samuel pretended to think very hard. Well, if Grandpa counted correctly, I might be about 7 birthdays behind. The little girl gasped dramatically. That's a lot of cake. Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. For the first time that afternoon, the gas station no longer felt like the place where a man had been humiliated. It had become the place where a family finally found its way back to one another. And standing only a few steps away, Emily's husband quietly realized that the hardest conversation of his life was still waiting to begin. The laughter faded as gently as it had begun. No one hurried back to their cars. No one seemed interested in finishing their errands anymore. Something far more important than gasoline had brought everyone to a standstill. Emily wiped the last of her tears and looked at her father. There was one question she had carried for more than 2 decades. One she had never found the courage to ask. Dad, Samuel met her eyes. Why didn't you come after me? The gas station fell silent again. Even Daisy instinctively held the stuffed rabbit closer, sensing the conversation had become something sacred. Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the horizon where the afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent. I wanted to. His voice was almost lost beneath the distant traffic. More times than you could imagine. Emily swallowed hard. Then why didn't you? Samuel reached into the inside pocket of his faded jacket. For a moment, everyone expected him to pull out a photograph. Instead, he unfolded a worn envelope. Its edges had softened from years of being handled. The paper had yellowed with age. He handed it to Emily. I carried this everywhere. She stared at the handwriting on the front. It was her own address, the one she had lived in shortly after graduating from college. Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, unsent. The ink had faded slightly, but every word remained clear. My dearest Emily, by the time you read this, I hope you've built the life your mother dreamed for you. If staying away helps you fly higher, then I'll carry the loneliness gladly. Just promise me one thing. Never believe that silence means I stopped loving you. Love always, Dad. Emily covered her mouth. The tears returned instantly. You never mailed it. Samuel nodded slowly. I drove to your apartment. I parked across the street. I saw you walking inside with your new life. He smiled sadly. You looked happy. I didn't want my regrets to become your burden. Emily shook her head through uncontrollable sobs. It wasn't happiness. It was loneliness. She looked at him with broken eyes. I waited for you too. Samuel's expression froze. You waited. I checked the mailbox every week. I kept thinking. She struggled to breathe. Maybe Dad will write. The truth struck both of them with devastating force. 2 people, standing on opposite sides of silence. Each believing the other had chosen to let go. Neither realizing they had been waiting for exactly the same thing. The businessman lowered his head. Until now, he had assumed Samuel had abandoned his daughter. That assumption had quietly shaped every opinion he'd formed about the old man. Now the truth stood before him in flesh and tears. Samuel hadn't disappeared because he stopped caring. He had stepped back because he believed love sometimes meant sacrificing even the chance to be remembered. Emily carefully folded the letter again. Her eyes drifted toward the old pickup. Dad, she whispered. Is that why you never bought another house? Samuel smiled. This one was already big enough. She frowned slightly. But you live there alone. I know. His answer came gently. I was keeping a room ready. Emily's breathing caught. The second bedroom. Samuel nodded. I never changed it. The wallpaper with the little blue birds. The bookshelf. The rocking chair your mother loved. They're all still there. Emily remembered. Every detail. Even the tiny glow-in-the-dark stars they had stuck across the ceiling when she was 9. You kept all of it? Samuel chuckled softly. I wasn't sure what a granddaughter might like someday. So I figured I'd wait. Daisy tugged excitedly on Emily's hand. Mom, do I have a room at Grandpa's house? Emily couldn't answer. She simply nodded while tears streamed down her face. Samuel smiled. You've always had one. The little girl beamed. I want to see it today. The simple request shattered the last wall around Emily's heart. She looked at her father with overwhelming disbelief. For all these years, you never gave up on us. Samuel's eyes glistened. A father's job isn't to stop loving. It's to keep the door open. Across the station, the businessman finally stepped forward. Each footstep felt heavier than the last. He stopped in front of Samuel. For several long seconds, he couldn't speak. The expensive suit, the luxury watch, the polished shoes. None of them could hide the shame written across his face. I judged you. His voice cracked. Before I knew a single thing about you. Samuel remained silent. I called you trash. The words sounded uglier now than they had an hour earlier. I mocked your truck, your clothes, your life. He lowered his eyes. And all along, he glanced toward Emily. Everything my family has. Started with your sacrifices. No one interrupted. Some apologies deserved room to breathe. Samuel studied the younger man quietly. Then he asked a simple question. "Do you love my daughter?" The businessman looked up immediately. "More than anything." "And Daisy? I'd give my life for her." Samuel nodded once. "Then spend less time proving you're successful, and more time making sure they never question they're loved." The businessman felt tears gathering despite every attempt to stop them. Because those weren't the words of a defeated old man. They were the words of a father who had already spent a lifetime proving exactly what love looked like. The apology hung in the afternoon air. No one spoke. No one looked away. The businessman stood before Samuel with his head lowered, waiting for an answer he wasn't sure he deserved. Samuel studied him quietly. Years ago, he might have answered with anger. Today, all he saw was another father trying not to fail the people he loved. "It's all right," Samuel said gently. The younger man looked up in disbelief. "No." His voice cracked. "It's not. I humiliated you. In front of your family. In front of my daughter." He swallowed hard. "And I did it because I thought money made me better." Samuel smiled faintly. "Money can buy comfort. It can't buy character." The words weren't spoken as a rebuke. They sounded more like a lesson passed from one generation to the next. The businessman slowly removed the expensive watch from his wrist, then the keys to the luxury SUV. Finally, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick stack of cash. "Please." He held everything toward Samuel. "I know this can't repay what I did, but let me do something." Samuel didn't even glance at the money. Instead, he carefully folded the younger man's fingers back around it. "Keep it." The businessman blinked. "I don't understand." Samuel looked toward Daisy, who was happily showing the pink rabbit to her mother. "Your daughter doesn't need to see her father buying forgiveness. She needs to see him earning it." Those words struck even deeper than the apology itself. The businessman slowly lowered his hand. For the first time in many years, no amount of money could solve the problem before him. Emily stepped beside her husband. She gently took his hand. "He's right. You can't change what happened, but you can choose who you become after today." He nodded silently. A tear escaped before he could stop it. Across the parking lot, an elderly truck driver removed his baseball cap. Without saying a word, he gave Samuel a respectful nod. Another customer followed. Then another. Soon, several strangers quietly stood with their hats over their hearts. No one had asked them to. Respect had arrived on its own. The teenage cashier straightened unconsciously behind the counter. The mother from Pump 6 smiled through misty eyes. Even the mechanic working at the service bay next door paused, wiped the grease from his hands, and stood silently watching. No applause. No speeches. Just a quiet acknowledgement of a man whose dignity had never depended on anyone else's opinion. Samuel looked almost embarrassed by the attention. "You really don't have to do this." The truck driver smiled. "Maybe we should have done it sooner." The businessman took one slow step toward Samuel. Then another. Finally, he extended his hand. Not as a successful executive. Not as someone trying to save face. Simply as a son-in-law asking for another chance. Samuel looked at the outstretched hand. Then, instead of shaking it, he pulled the younger man into a brief embrace. The businessman froze. His shoulders trembled. "I'm sorry, Dad." The word escaped before he even realized he'd spoken it. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, then patted him gently on the back. "Take care of my girls." "I will. I promise." Samuel nodded. "I believe you." Daisy suddenly clapped her hands. Family hug. The little girl rushed between them, wrapping her tiny arms around both men. Emily laughed through fresh tears and joined them. Within seconds, the four of them stood together in the middle of the gas station. A family, broken once, finding its way back. The afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the concrete. The faded pickup truck stood beside the gleaming SUV. Old paint beside polished chrome. Years of sacrifice beside years of success. Neither vehicle mattered anymore, because everyone watching finally understood the truth. One man had spent his life building wealth. The other had spent his life building people. Only one of those legacies could be inherited. As the family slowly separated, the businessman walked towards Samuel's old pickup. He looked at the weathered driver's door, the chipped paint, the rust near the wheel well. Without saying a word, he picked up the paper towels from the windshield station and gently wiped away the dust that had gathered along the side of the truck. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, but Samuel noticed. He smiled quietly, not because his truck had become cleaner, because the younger man finally understood what respect looked like. Sometimes, the greatest reversal of power isn't watching the proud become powerless. It's watching the proud become humble. The crowd slowly drifted back to their lives. Fuel pumps clicked one by one. Car doors closed. Engines started. Yet no one left without glancing back one last time. Some moments asked nothing from the people who witnessed them, except to remember. Samuel stood beside his old pickup, watching Daisy carefully buckle the pink rabbit into the back seat of the SUV. She worked with complete concentration. There, she announced proudly. Now Bunny is safe. Samuel chuckled. You've always taken good care of your friends. She looked over her shoulder. How do you know? He smiled. Because your mom used to tuck her dolls into bed before she went to sleep. Daisy's eyes grew wide. Really? Emily laughed softly. I actually did. And Grandpa used to check on every single one of them before turning off the light. Samuel rubbed the back of his neck, slightly embarrassed. I didn't want anyone feeling left out. Daisy ran over and hugged him again. I don't think you'll ever leave anyone out. Samuel held her close. No, I don't think I will. Nearby, the businessman quietly opened the tailgate of Samuel's pickup. Inside lay a neatly organized toolbox. Every wrench polished. Every screwdriver returned to its proper place. Nothing expensive. Everything cared for. Resting in one corner was a small wooden box. Its lid had been worn smooth by years of use. Samuel noticed him looking. Go ahead. The younger man hesitated. Are you sure? Samuel nodded. Inside the box were birthday cards. Dozens of them. Each envelope carefully labeled in the same steady handwriting. For Daisy, age 1. For Daisy, age 2. For Daisy, age 3. Year after year. Birthday after birthday. Every card had been written. None had ever been delivered. The businessman carefully opened the first one. Inside, in faded blue ink, were only a few simple lines. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I don't know if we'll meet this year, but I hope someone makes you laugh today. Love, Grandpa. He couldn't read any farther. His vision blurred. He gently closed the card and looked at Samuel. You wrote one. Every year. Samuel nodded. It helped me feel like I hadn't missed your birthdays completely. The younger man wiped his eyes. You never stopped being her grandfather. I never knew how. Samuel answered with quiet honesty. So I chose not to. Emily stepped closer and looked inside the wooden box. There were Christmas ornaments wrapped in newspaper. Report cards Samuel had somehow managed to receive through old family friends. Newspaper clippings from Emily's college graduation. A tiny pair of pink baby shoes. And one faded photograph. It showed a young Emily sitting on Samuel's shoulders during a county fair. Both of them were laughing. Her mother stood beside them, holding cotton candy, smiling at the camera. Emily picked up the photograph with trembling hands. I thought this was lost. Samuel smiled. I've been looking at it every Sunday. She leaned against him again. So much time. Samuel gently kissed the top of her head. We still have today. Daisy suddenly tugged on his sleeve. Grandpa, yes. When are you coming to our house? Samuel looked at Emily, then at her husband. The younger man answered before anyone else could. Not just visiting. He walked over and handed Samuel a small key. Our guest room is empty. He smiled through damp eyes. It doesn't have to stay that way. Samuel stared at the house, key resting in his palm. His weathered fingers closed around it slowly. I don't want to be a burden. Emily laughed softly. You've been carrying us your whole life. It's finally our turn. For several seconds, Samuel couldn't speak. The man who had endured decades of loneliness without complaint found himself overwhelmed by the simplest invitation. Come home. 2 ordinary words. Yet they healed wounds that 23 years of silence never could. As the family prepared to leave, Samuel climbed into his faded pickup. The businessman stood beside the driver's window. One more thing. Samuel rolled the window down. I'm selling the SUV. Samuel looked puzzled. You don't have to do that. I know. The younger man smiled. But I don't need 2 reminders of who I used to be. He glanced at the old pickup. And I think I'd rather spend that money making memories than making payments. Samuel laughed. A full, warm laugh. Perhaps the first one in years. The 2 vehicles pulled away from the gas station together. The faded pickup in front. The luxury SUV following behind. Not because one was faster. Not because one was worth more. But because, for the first time, no one was trying to race ahead. A week later, Pumpford looked strangely empty on Friday afternoon. Ethan glanced toward the road out of habit, then smiled. A familiar pickup turned into the station. Only this time, a little girl sat in the passenger seat, waving excitedly through the open window. Behind them came Emily's car. The businessman climbed out carrying a picnic basket instead of a briefcase. Daisy jumped from the truck and sprinted toward Ethan. Guess what? What? I have the best grandpa in the whole world. Ethan looked toward Samuel. The old man simply smiled and tipped his cap. He didn't need to explain anything. Some truths were too beautiful for words. That evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon, the family gathered on the porch of the little white house. The second bedroom door stood open. Laughter drifted through the windows that had been silent for so many years. Pink flowers swayed gently in the warm breeze. The rocking chair moved ever so slightly, not from loneliness anymore, but because someone had finally come home. Quiet morals: some people leave behind fortunes. Others leave behind a place where broken hearts always know they can return. In the end, the greatest wealth is not measured by what we own, but by whose arms still feel like home.